The message arrived at 4:15 on a Wednesday afternoon. Family dinner tonight, 8 p.m. Don't miss it. Important announcement about the restaurant group. Love, Mom. I stared at my phone from my corner office, a slight smile crossing my face. It had been 9 months since I'd heard from any of them. 9 months since my company's acquisition announcement, where I'd stood at that podium alone, searching the audience for faces that never showed. My older sister Rachel had called the morning of. Sorry, can't make it, yoga retreat. You get it, right? My younger sister Emma didn't bother with explanations, just radio silence. Dad's text came 3 hours before the announcement. Your mother has a migraine. We'll toast your little venture another day, kiddo. But Dad had been healthy enough to attend Emma's gallery opening that same weekend. I'd seen the photos on social media. Now, suddenly, there was urgent family business. I knew precisely what had shifted. 2 days ago, Business Insider had published its annual Female Founders feature. My face was on page 2. My company, Zenith Wellness, had just been valued at $87 million. And now, Mom wanted dinner. I texted back, I'll be there. Before we dive into what happened, drop a comment. Where are you listening from right now? I want to know how far our community reaches. I pulled up to the yacht club at exactly 8 p.m. in my old Honda. I'd purchased a Mercedes 6 months ago, but I kept it garaged. Driving this aging car to family gatherings was a strategic choice, a method to maintain the baseline. They expected the struggling daughter, the one still finding her footing, so I gave them that version. It made them feel superior, and when people feel superior, they get sloppy. The parking attendant looked at my vehicle with disdain, but I handed him a 20 and walked toward the entrance. The glass doors swung open, releasing a wave of climate-controlled air that smelled like privilege and furniture polish. As I walked down the corridor toward the private dining area, my heartbeat didn't accelerate. My hands didn't tremble. I was composed. But beneath the composure, there was a question bothering me. Why did I come? I knew who they were. I knew they only reached out when they wanted something, so why was I walking back into this situation? It wasn't foolishness. I wasn't deluded. I understood then that I was trapped in the pattern of normalizing mistreatment. You see, when you're raised in an environment where affection is conditional, you don't learn to distance yourself from harm. You learn to tolerate it. You normalize the disrespect because acknowledging it would mean admitting that the people who should cherish you actually view you as an asset, not a person. It's a specific type of psychological programming. You convince yourself that if you just appear one more time, if you just accomplish one more thing, if you just demonstrate your value one more time, the dynamic will transform. You become dependent on the hope of a different outcome. It's like gambling. You keep placing bets thinking the next round will be when they finally recognize you, but the house always wins. I paused at the entrance to the private room. I could hear them laughing inside. The sound was loud, theatrical. It was the sound of people who believed they were invulnerable. I adjusted my blazer, took a breath, and reminded myself of the reality. I wasn't here to earn their approval anymore. I wasn't here to gamble. I was here to shut down the casino. I pushed the door open. The room was bathed in soft amber light. The table was arranged for 6. Mom, Dad, Rachel, Emma, and Aunt Patricia were already seated. They looked like a photograph of coastal affluence. Dad was wearing his favorite charcoal suit, the one he wore when negotiating contracts. Aunt Patricia, the family's self-proclaimed business expert, was pouring Prosecco. There she is, Dad's voice boomed, resonating off the walls. The prodigal daughter graces us with her presence. He stood, arms extended, performing the role of the welcoming patriarch. Mom hurried over, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, and pulled me into an embrace that smelled of designer fragrance and white wine. "We've missed you terribly, Alexandra," she whispered, pulling back to examine me. "You look exhausted. Are you sleeping enough? That startup grind must be draining." "I'm fine, Mom," I said, stepping away from her reach. "Actually, I've never felt better." "Well, sit, Dad commanded, gesturing to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table.
We ordered the premium Veuve Clicquot, only the finest for tonight. I sat down. I observed the bottle. Vintage year, $350 retail. I knew for certain that their restaurant chain, Coastal Bistros, hadn't shown profit in 4 quarters. They were drinking financed celebration. So, Rachel said, leaning back in her chair with a smirk, we saw the article, $87 million valuation. Impressive for a little wellness app. Of course, valuation isn't liquid capital, is it? It's just theoretical money until you sell.
It's a decent beginning, Aunt Patricia added, swirling her glass. But wellness is a saturated market, Alexandra. Technology is unstable. Real prosperity is in tangible assets, brick and mortar, like what your father and I have developed. I took a sip of water. Is that why we're here? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. To analyze my market position? Don't be so sensitive, Emma chimed in, not lifting her eyes from her phone. They're just offering perspective. You should appreciate it. Dad's been doing this for 25 years. We're here to celebrate, Dad interrupted, raising his glass. To family and to the future, specifically the future of Coastal Bistros. They all raised their glasses. I didn't touch mine. We have exciting news, Mom said, beaming. We're expanding. We're finally transforming the flagship location into an upscale destination. Wine bar, private dining rooms, the complete vision. It'll be the premier establishment in the region. That sounds expensive, I said. It requires capital to generate returns, Dad said, his smile tightening fractionally. We have the concept, we have the expertise, we just need to bridge the financing gap to finalize the liquor licenses. Once we commence construction, the investors will materialize. I looked around the table. They were all nodding, reinforcing each other's fantasy. They genuinely believed that their outdated, declining restaurants were one wine bar away from becoming Michelin-starred establishments. They were performing prosperity for an audience of one, me. And that, Dad said, setting his glass down with a deliberate thud, is where you factor in, Alexandra. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The celebration was over. The proposition had begun. We want to offer you an opportunity, Aunt Patricia said, leaning forward, her eyes sharp with calculation, a chance to invest in the legacy. We understand your liquidity is allocated in your app, but you have access to financing. You have credibility now. We need a bridge loan, $1.8 million, just to clear the initial regulatory requirements. We'll reimburse you with interest once the construction financing closes. But more significantly, we'll give you equity. You'll be a partner in an established business. I stared at him. $1.8 million. They weren't requesting, they were conferring a privilege. You want me to lend you $1.8 million? I repeated. Invest, Rachel corrected. Invest in your family. Listen, Alexandra, we know you've had some fortune with your tech venture, but let's be realistic. You don't have the foundation for sustained operations. You're competent at technology, perhaps, but this is legacy building. And honestly, Mom added, her voice dropping to a guilt-laden whisper, after everything we've provided for you, the support, the education, it feels appropriate that you contribute. We supported you for so long, honey. Now it's your turn to help shoulder the responsibility. I almost laughed. They supported me? I paid my own tuition. I started my company with capital I accumulated while working 2 jobs. They hadn't contributed a cent. In fact, when I asked Dad for feedback on my first business plan 4 years ago, he told me to pursue a real career and stop fantasizing. You have resources, Dad said, his voice hardening, but you lack vision, you lack legacy. We're offering you both. I looked at my father. I looked at the perspiration forming on his forehead. I looked at the way Aunt Patricia's hand trembled slightly holding her glass.
And suddenly, I didn't see an imposing patriarch, I saw a desperate man attempting to sell me passage on a sinking ship. "I'm going to stop you right there," I said, my voice cool and measured. "There is no legacy." Dad blinked. "What?" "There is no legacy," I repeated, opening the leather folder I'd brought with me. "Coastal Bistros has been insolvent for 16 months. Your debt-to-revenue ratio is catastrophic. You haven't expanded because you cannot. No institution will finance you."
I slid a document across the table. It was a financial analysis. Your customer traffic is down 35% year over year. I continued, reciting the data from memory. Your flagship location requires $2.5 million in deferred maintenance just to meet health code standards. You don't need a bridge loan for expansion, you need intervention to avoid liquidation. "How dare you?" Aunt Patricia sputtered, her face flushing crimson. "These are confidential business matters. You have no authority." "I have complete authority," I said, interrupting her, "because you just asked me for $1.8 million based on deception. You're not building a legacy, Dad. You're prolonging the inevitable." Dad slammed his palm on the table, rattling the expensive glassware. "You ungrateful little... Who do you think you are, walking in here flashing your tech money, disrespecting your family? You think you're superior because you got lucky with an app?" "It wasn't luck," I said, "and it wasn't family money." "We gave you everything," Mom cried, tears materializing on cue. "We sacrificed everything." "You sacrificed nothing," I said, my voice dropping lower, colder. "I worked 3 jobs during university. I slept in my car for 3 weeks when I launched Zenith because I couldn't afford rent. When I asked you for help then, just a co-signature on a lease, not even money, you told me to learn responsibility." "And you did," Dad shouted. "Look at you now. We made you resilient." I looked at him, truly looked at him. His face was contorted in rage, veins prominent in his neck. And in that moment, I understood the illusion of authority, the empty treasury. You see, my father had always derived his power from his perceived status as the provider, the entrepreneur, the patriarch. He shouted, he demanded, he diminished because he needed to project strength to conceal the fact that he was failing. His anger wasn't strength, it was a defensive response. It was the roar of a paper tiger. He was posturing, attempting to use volume to compensate for lack of substance. He believed that if he performed the role of the boss, I would revert to being the subordinate daughter. But power isn't about who can shout the loudest, it's about who controls the leverage. And for the first time in my existence, I realized his pockets were empty and mine were full. His authority was a phantom haunting a structure that had already been condemned. "I'm not lending you the money," I said, closing my folder, "and I'm not investing." "Then you're dead to us," Dad screamed, standing so abruptly his chair toppled backward. "You walk out that door without writing that check, and you're no daughter of mine. You're nothing." The door to the private room opened. "Apologies for the interruption," a calm voice said. It was Marcus, my COO. He walked in looking impeccable in a navy suit, holding a substantial manila envelope. He didn't acknowledge my family. He walked directly to me. "The documentation is finalized, Alexandra. The acquisition just completed." "Who is this?" Mom demanded, wiping her eyes. "This is Marcus," I said, accepting the envelope. "He manages my acquisitions." "Acquisitions?" Rachel laughed nervously. "What are you acquiring? Another app?" "No," I said. "I bought the debt." Silence descended over the room. Absolute, suffocating silence. "What debt?" Dad whispered, his face draining of color. "The commercial loans on Coastal Bistros. You've been in default for 5 months. The bank was preparing foreclosure. They bundled your debt and sold it to a private equity firm last week. That firm is a subsidiary of Zenith Wellness." I placed the documentation on the table, right beside the bottle of Veuve Clicquot. "I didn't just decline your loan, Dad. I purchased your debt. I own the mortgages, the properties, and the liabilities. I own you."
I watched the realization strike them sequentially. Aunt Patricia collapsed in her chair, looking deflated. Rachel stared at the documents, her mouth agape. Mom covered her mouth to suppress a sob. And Dad just stared at me. The rage was gone, replaced by a terrifying vacancy. The illusion was shattered. The patriarch was gone. All that remained was a man who owed his daughter $7.2 million. You can't do this, he stammered. We're family. Yes, I said, we are, which is why I'm not initiating eviction immediately. I'm giving you 45 days to vacate the properties. I'm converting the flagship location into a Zenith Wellness Retreat Center. It's the only path to making the real estate profitable again. 45 days? Mom wailed. But this is our livelihood. This is our legacy. It was a failing enterprise, I said. Now it's a solvent one. I pulled a check from the envelope. This is for $250,000, I said, placing it on the table. Consider it a settlement. It's more than the equity is worth, which is negative. It's sufficient to secure a comfortable residence and restart. Take it. Dad looked at the check. He looked at me. I saw the conflict in his eyes, pride versus survival. I won't accept your charity, he spat. It's not charity, I said. It's severance. The room erupted. Mom was sobbing, pleading with Dad to accept the check. Aunt Patricia was screaming at Dad for destroying everything. Rachel and Emma were arguing about who would lose their anticipated inheritances. It was chaos. It was ugly. And I simply observed. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and walked toward the door. They didn't even register my departure. They were too preoccupied tearing each other apart over the remnants I'd left them. I walked out of the yacht club and into the cool evening air. Marcus was waiting by my car, my actual car, the sleek black Mercedes. He opened the door for me. You all right? He asked. Yeah, I said, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a decade. I am. I started the engine. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. We can resolve this. Please, Alexandra, just come back inside. I looked at the message. For a moment, I felt that old impulse, the habit of hope, the desire to be the dutiful daughter, to fix it, to rescue them. But then I remembered the important announcement. I remembered the bridge loan. I remembered that they only valued me when they thought I was useful. I deleted the message. Then I blocked the number. As I drove away, watching the yacht club disappear in my rear-view mirror, I realized something profound. It wasn't just about winning. It wasn't just about the capital or the properties. It was a narrative victory. I had spent my entire life as a supporting character in their drama. The disappointment, the invisible one, the failure. By purchasing their debt, by forcing their hand, I hadn't just defeated them, I had rewritten the story. I was no longer the daughter they rejected. I was the author of their fate. I had removed them from my narrative. They were no longer the antagonists. They were just gone. Irrelevant footnotes in a biography that was just beginning. I turned onto the interstate, the city lights spreading out before me like a constellation. I was free. Have you ever had to outgrow a place or people to protect yourself? Share your story in the comments, and if you believe in building your own value, hit that like button.